A young woman is terrorized by a menacing stalker.
He's been calling her friends, he's been calling where she works.
Is there something I don't know?
A caring friend is in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Hey, man, look.
The officer responded to the location, observed a vehicle with its door open.
Looks like I've got 2 gunshot victims. Send me back up as soon as possible.
Somebody was in the car for a period of time waiting for them to come back, waiting to kill them.
The ensuing murder investigation leads law enforcement down a twisting path of cold brutality and malicious deceit.
Who would do this to this pair of friends?
But in a case as shocking as this one, what you see isn't always what you get.
I think he's got the personality to climb in your bedroom window and slit your throat in the middle of the night. If he wants to kill you, he would do it by any means necessary.
December 7th, 2008, Bridgeport, Connecticut. Landlord Cheryl Wilson and her son Sean are spending a quiet evening at home when they're suddenly interrupted by a series of loud booms.
That came from right outside.
Get away from the window.
While Cheryl dials 911, Bridgeport, Connecticut police officer Sergeant Melody Perbesh is on her usual neighborhood beat when she too hears the disturbing sounds.
Sergeant Melody Prebish was patrolling the neighborhood. She was close by, and then she heard shots. So she took action to see exactly what was going on.
I've got gunshots in the area. I'm trying to pinpoint the location now. I may need some backup.
She just sort of took one turn after another trying to figure out where they were coming from. And it's a very hard thing to figure out where gunshots are coming from in the city. And she happened to get hit on the right spot. She ended up on Ash Street.
She saw a man in the driver's seat who had already died.
Looks like I've got 2 gunshot victims. Send me back up as soon as possible.
There was a lady in the passenger seat who was clinging to life.
Send me an ambulance. I've got one with a pulse.
The radio reported that there had been multiple shots fired in the vicinity of Ash Street, and 2 parties were hit, and that ambulances were on the way.
As the scene is secured, Cheryl Wilson identifies the victims for police. Her tenant, 36-year-old Debbie Brown, and Debbie's friend, Desmond McFarland.
Desmond is already dead. Debbie is still clinging on to life.
She's still alive, but riddled with blood and bullets.
As paramedics load Debbie onto a gurney, the next few minutes are critical.
This is truly a life-or-death situation.
But what no one yet knows is what sparked this deadly shooting. As detectives work to find a killer, they could never imagine the faces of deception that would stand between them and justice.
This was something that Connecticut was not used to.
It was very confusing. No one knew what to make of it. This individual was a master of deceit.
Born on October 9th, 1972, Debbie Brown grew up with a loving family on the Caribbean island of Jamaica.
My mom was born in Kingston. She's my grandma's last child. She's the baby. She was light-skinned. She was really tall. She has really, really nice lips. I think I got her lips. My mom was gorgeous.
And Debbie's beauty was only rivaled by her infectious personality.
She loved enjoying herself. She loved people being around her to be happy. If you're around her, there's not one dull moment. You gotta always smile. You gotta always laugh. Always enjoy yourself. There's not a dull moment when she's around.
In 1992, Debbie's warm spirit and good looks quickly caught the attention of a local musician, Otis Morrison.
He was a DJ at the time. He was an entertainer. A DJ in Jamaica is like a rap artist. My mom had known him because he lived up the street, so they were friends before progressing into a relationship.
I wrote your song.
You did?
Yeah. Yeah, I had no choice. You're all I think about.
Before long, The music of their love produced their greatest joy together.
They had a wonderful daughter named Regine.
Regine was her pride and joy, and Regine was her motivation for doing just about everything.
But even though this couple shared a beautiful daughter, after nearly 6 years together, the hardships of an entertainer's life drove a wedge between Debbie and Otis.
My mom and my dad stayed together for quite a while until I was, let's say, 4 or 5.
When Debbie finally split from Otis in 1998, she struggled to find gainful employment. Needing a fresh start, in 2002, she decided to look for opportunities beyond the borders of her beloved home country.
She transitioned to the United States, taking her daughter with her and providing her daughter with the American dream.
She wanted a better life for me, being her only kid. She stayed in New York with a friend for some time. She settled in Connecticut.
Once in Connecticut, Debbie pursued a career in the healthcare industry.
She was doing the best that she could for her daughter, being a single parent, and she worked as a home health nurse, which was a great way of making income, and she was really looking forward to that career.
Debbie Brown was a very good working person. She worked as a CNA, and she also worked as a nanny, and she always was very conscientious.
But Debbie's new life in America wasn't all hard work. In 2006, she met a young expat from Jamaica named Sheldon Reynolds.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, you're from Jamaica?
Excuse me?
The earrings.
Oh, Kingston, actually.
Kingston.
Yeah, my name's Debbie.
Debbie, Sheldon.
They immediately hit it off. Sheldon was a lot like Debbie in that he was forging a new life in Connecticut.
So, how do you like America?
I like it. It's not always easy, but it's the best for me and my daughter.
Yeah.
They had a wonderful relationship, and everything was new to her.
I didn't know anything about him prior, so when I met him, I just figured more or less, all right, well, now my mom has a boyfriend, so it's just normal.
Sheldon, this is my daughter, Regine.
Hi.
This is Sheldon.
Nice to meet you, Regine. I don't know which one's prettier between the two of you.
Honey, take these upstairs. I'll be up in a minute, okay?
Okay. He was really nice to me. If my mom was gonna go somewhere, he'd give me money.
Sheldon helped Debbie take care of her daughter, which meant the world to her.
Eventually, the relationship became serious enough to support the family dynamic Debbie had left behind in Jamaica.
Debbie Brown, single mother, took her young daughter and ultimately moved in with Sheldon Reynolds, residing together for some time in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
But as Debbie grew to be accepted in her Connecticut community as a loving mother and devoted caretaker, she began to wonder if being lucky in life meant being unlucky in love.
I need someone stable in my life, Sheldon. I need someone with a stable job, not whatever it is you do.
What I do provides for this home.
He was always frequent in New York. We'd leave Bridgeport to go to New York for him to stay 5 minutes and talk to somebody.
It's not working out, Sheldon. It's not how I thought it was going to be.
They had a wonderful family life. Then things went south, so she had to move out.
But it wasn't long before Debbie was back on her feet again.
Debbie moved in with her longtime friend Cheryl on Ash Street in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Things started going well for Debbie. She had people around her who cared for her. She was saving money by having roommates, so things were going in the right direction.
Cheryl Wilson agreed to have Debbie and her daughter live with them. Also in that apartment were two young adult children of Cheryl Wilson and a cousin, I believe, living there at the time.
Naturally, it was only a matter of time before a woman as captivating as Debbie caught the eye of a charming 41-year-old named Desmond McFarland.
They met in the fall of 2008, just a few months after her breakup with Sheldon.
My mom would always want to go out. When she met Desmond, she was like, yes, she had someone to take her to places because he had lived in Bridgeport for quite a while. He owned a restaurant also. He was just like a great guy.
He was a family man. He had a daughter. He had a job. He was a very hardworking person.
He'd pick her up from the train station. I think he just did it out of my mom being hot. So he just I just think he wanted to do it.
But whether this budding friendship was destined for something more will forever remain a mystery. Because on this cold December night in Connecticut, the unspeakable happens. And as Debbie clings to life, the hunt for answers begins.
Just telling me that an ambulance took my mom. So I did not cry at that point because I cannot process what you're telling me.
The winter of 2008 marked the 6th year in America for 36-year-old Jamaican-born expat Debbie Brown. And though no one meant more to Debbie than her daughter Regine, this exotic angel still attracted plenty of attention from the opposite sex.
She knew how to put herself together. Very, 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 very attractive.
One of the men vying for Debbie's affection was 41-year-old Desmond McFarland.
Desmond was definitely attracted to her, and they seemed to have a lot in common.
But now, on December 7th, 2008, that friendship lay drowned in blood mere feet from the safety of Debbie's home.
Police arrive on the scene. They're not exactly sure what they're dealing with here. They know they have lots of bullets. They've got at least one dead body. Debbie is taken from the scene. There's a potential that she could make it.
Debbie had been shot multiple times, and now doctors were fighting to save her life.
Inside Debbie's second-floor apartment, her daughter Regine quickly becomes aware of the unfolding tragedy.
What happened?
Honey, I'm sorry. Your mother's been shot.
So sorry. I went onto the porch because there's a porch overlooking outside, and I saw the car out there. And then they told me that Desmond is dead.
As Bridgeport detectives arrive, they find a scene of unspeakable carnage.
The driver, he was slumped over the wheel. His head was down. There was blood on him. He was lifeless. There was no signs of life. So Mr. McFarland was left in the vehicle to preserve the integrity of the investigation. There'd be no point in moving him at that point.
Two victims forced detectives to consider every last possibility.
Was Desmond the target, or Debbie, or both? Maybe this was a domestic situation between the two of them.
Unfortunately, investigators know it's not the first crime to plague this already troubled area.
There's a lot of crime that comes through the I-95 corridor. It's very easy for criminal groups to target places in Fairfield County.
Chris Barono and his team started investigating. They went through the evidence, they cased the crime scene to see exactly who would do this to this set of friends.
Whenever there's a major crime like this and they set up a perimeter to try to keep contamination, so something doesn't contaminate the crime scene, they set up a perimeter and then they meticulously go through everything that they can, all the area around, looking for shell casings, looking for blood, looking for weapons, looking for anything that might be useful in figuring out the crime.
Both victims had been shot multiple times, and there was no gun found at the scene.
They've got bullets riddled all over.
There were a total of 11 shots. Desmond was shot 6 times, and Debbie was shot 5 times.
What we got here? Like 40 cal shell casings. Let's get these back and processed.
So from there, we need to find out more details about what happened.
Detectives learn more when they speak to Sergeant Prabesh about her initial response.
I was patrolling the area and I heard several gunshots ring out. I located this vehicle. The vehicle was running and the passenger door was still open.
Ms. Brown's body was actually almost on top of Mr. McFarland.
Did you see anybody flee?
No, I didn't see anybody flee.
Sergeant Prebish said it looked to her as if the shooting was coming from the passenger side and Ms. Brown was in the passenger seat.
Sergeant Prabesh's account leads detectives to reach a conclusion.
He was shot first and she was trying to get away from the shooter at that point and climbing over Mr. McFarland's body, trying to get to the driver's side door.
Was Debbie simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? At this point, investigators still aren't certain. Then detectives receive word of a gut-wrenching development.
Debbie was taken to the hospital, and she was pronounced dead at the hospital.
That lady they took to the hospital passed away.
News of the tragedy spreads to Debbie's devastated family.
I just automatically not like it. My mom said I couldn't do anything but cry. And I cried and I cried.
It's like, I didn't believe it. And I didn't believe it. When I hear it, it just don't sound real to me.
While the cloud of pain and anguish hangs heavy over Regine and her family, the development only makes investigators more resolute.
From there, I start a neighborhood canvass. I start knocking on doors. I start talking to people who have the potential to be witnesses.
The detectives wanted to talk to everyone at the house. They talked to Sean Nugent, who was Cheryl Wilson's son.
Tell us what you know.
Well, my mom and I were sitting down at dinner, and I was setting out plates, and we just heard this bang, bang, bang. So I went to the window to see what was going on, and I just saw this guy running away.
Sean only reports catching a glimpse of the perpetrator, but what he did see may prove crucial to investigators.
Now, it was dark, so he couldn't describe facial features or anything like that, but he said it was a slight man.
Sean noticed that the slim black man was wearing a tam hat, which is a very distinctive feature.
A tam? Yeah, you know, like the hats that Jamaican guys wear, like a beanie.
Police immediately issue an APB on the unknown assailant. In the meantime, questions continue to swirl.
Who was this man, and why had he perpetrated this terrible crime?
But as investigators continue to widen their search, a tantalizing piece of information is about to be uncovered. And it may just explain how Debbie and Desmond found themselves in the crosshairs of a killer.
You reported a complaint about what, ma'am? Donald Davis, he's arrested me.
December 7th, 2008. Police in Bridgeport, Connecticut are investigating a brutal double homicide that has claimed the lives of 36-year-old Debbie Brown and her 41-year-old friend, Desmond McFarland. Detectives suspect this attack wasn't random, but a specifically targeted killing.
Based on the evidence and at least the angle of the bullets, it appeared that the individual shot Desmond first. So was he the target of what was going on?
Was this a vengeance? Did Desmond have any enemies who wanted to make sure he was dead?
Who, if anyone, was out to get Desmond?
But as police talk to friends and family, it seems the Bridgeport restaurateur makes an unlikely target.
He was really an all-around great guy. I mean, he was really a great person.
He was also helping Debbie. She used the train to commute to and from her jobs, and so he would give her a ride to the train station and back. He was a very generous, kind-hearted man. We didn't have any information that there would be anybody out there looking to kill Mr. McFarland.
If not Desmond, then what about Debbie?
Potentially Debbie, the home health aide, the single mother. This young lady, potentially, she too had some enemies.
Miss Wilson, we just want to ask you a few questions, okay?
Yes, of course.
He says, do you know who did this? She said, I think, she's been having problems with her boyfriend, Donald Davis.
That's her boyfriend?
Yes.
What's he been doing?
He's been acting crazy. It was discovered that Debbie was being harangued and harassed on a constant nature by an individual, a male, who was calling her constantly at both her work, her home, and I guess on her cell. It was to the point that Debbie had alerted her employers, do not indicate to this person that I'm even here.
This guy was calling her home, calling her friends, calling her work, being loud and cursing. So it really frightened Debbie.
Cheryl tells detectives that the stalking and threats had become severe enough that Debbie reached out to police in mid-October. Bridgeport police records confirm Cheryl's story.
There were 911 calls about this individual who had approached her on her job, startling her, telling her, I'm going to get you.
Bridgeport Police, Operator 20. Yeah, I made a complaint about Donald Davis. He's right there at the door now.
You reported a complaint about what, ma'am?
Donald Davis, he's arrested me.
All right.
He's right at my door now.
It's a stunning revelation, and detectives waste little time in chasing down a hot lead.
They also asked, do you have his phone number? And they did, because he had been calling their phone, so they had his cell phone number.
So when we go back to headquarters, we start doing paperwork and requests of the provider for that cell phone number, and we get the name back of Donald Davis and an address in New York, in the Bronx.
The next stop for Bridgeport detectives is the Bronx, New York, where they believe they'll find Donald Davis, the man reported to be terrorizing Debbie Brown.
Once they got the address, they went to that address in the Bronx, knocked on the door.
Yes, sir. I'm Officer Chris Barona with the Bridgeport Police Department.
I'm looking for Donald Davis. Is that you, sir?
No, my name's Mark Stewart. What's this about?
The Sprint number, although it is registered to Donald Davis, the address to where the bill goes is to an address in the Bronx of Mark Stewart.
It seems at first detectives have been led astray, but Mark Stewart is forthright with what he knows.
Mark started explaining to police officers he knew Donald Davis, and Donald Davis had his mail sent to Mark's house, that address where the police were knocking on the doors.
He agreed to take us to Castle Hill Avenue, to a brick apartment building, and he believed that Donald Davis lived on the second or third floor, but he wasn't sure.
But when detectives arrive at the building with Mark, there appears to be no sign of Donald.
The next day, we come back to Castle Hill Avenue at 9 o'clock in the evening. We're walking around project there, apartments. We're in the courtyard, and here comes this skinny guy, big glasses on, and a hat.
A hat just like the one Sean described seeing on the unknown male fleeing the scene of the crime.
He said, this looks like the guy. So we stopped him. Say, is your name Donald Davis? No. I think he said his name was Paul. I said, no, your name's not Paul. Your name's Donald Davis.
They approached him and asked him if he had a girlfriend in Bridgeport named Debbie, and he said he did.
Detectives pressed Donald Davis for details about his relationship with Debbie.
It was a long time ago, man. I'm with someone new.
Someone murdered her and another man last night in Bridgeport.
Dead.
Dead.
Debbie.
Debbie.
He had no remorse on his face, no expression on his face, except to say, don't say that, Debbie's not dead. I said, oh yeah, she's dead.
He was stoic with no emotion and said, no, she's not.
They asked him where he was the night before, the night of the murder, and he said he was in New York. First, he said he was with a girlfriend. They asked for the name of the girlfriend.
Donald chooses not to let the police know who his girlfriend happens to be.
We went back and forth in a dialogue. He wouldn't tell us. Do you have a car? Yeah, I have a car. Oh, where is it? He wouldn't tell us.
Detectives believe they've picked up a scent, but for now, they'll have to leave the trail.
Our encounter down in the Castle Hill apartments was what you would call a consensual encounter. We didn't have the authority or the probable cause to arrest him or detain him.
The police, at this point, they really don't have a whole lot to go on. Their senses are alerted. Potentially, they have a suspect.
He could have said, I don't want to talk to you, and kept walking. But he chose to stay and talk to us because I have a feeling he wanted to know what we knew and why we were there.
He's agitated, but he's not admitting anything that gave them information that would give them reason to believe that he was the perpetrator.
But as investigators prepare to cast a wider net, they'll soon learn that with every bit of new information they haul in, the picture only gets muddier and more frightening.
He said that he was looking for his wife, Debbie. She said, Debbie's not here, you have to leave.
She was scared to death of this man.
Nearly 48 hours after Debbie Brown and her friend Desmond McFarland were gunned down in a car outside Debbie's home, Bridgeport police acted on a tip that Debbie's ex, Donald Davis, had been stalking her. Investigators tracked Donald down. They got nothing out of him.
He seems puzzled. He seems not to have any knowledge of what has transpired.
Absent a warrant, absent probable cause, we have no authority to arrest this man, just based on what we know.
As detectives continue their rounds of interviews, they soon speak with a co-worker of Debbie's named Lavella Cooper.
It is our understanding that you were a friend and colleague of Debbie's?
That's right.
Did you notice anything strange about her? Any threats?
Well, some man came to see her one night. It was early October, and I was working in a home in Greenwich. It scared me half to death.
Lavella and Debbie were both home health aides, caring for an individual with medical issues. It was a 24-hour care service in which they would stay within the individual's residence overnight.
Debbie generally worked on the weekends, and Miss Cooper worked during the week.
Debbie asked me to switch shifts with her.
Lavella says the night she worked Debbie's shift had gone fine until she was awoken in the early morning hours by a strange commotion inside her patient's bedroom.
Approximately 5:30 in the morning on that shift, Lavella was awakened by a scream inside the house.
Oh my God! Who are you? And how did you get in here?
Someone entered the patient's home, not through the front door, but entered the place through the bedroom window.
He looked like a typical burglar. He had on a black outfit, he had on black gloves. She knew he had something in his right hand because he kept his hand behind him, which indicated he may have had a weapon.
She asked him what he was doing there. He said that he was looking for his wife, Debbie. She said, Debbie's not here, you have to leave.
You better get out of here before I call the police.
When he discovered that Debbie wasn't working that day, he left through the front door.
Can you describe the man for me?
I know he was tall, he was wearing a dark hoodie, and he had some sort of tam underneath the hoodie.
A tam?
Mm-hmm.
The man who broke into the house that night was wearing a tam.
That's the same style of hat that the man fleeing the crime scene had on.
Detectives believe this prowler might very well have been Donald Davis, but when they interview Debbie's supervisor, Beth Landers, they're thrown off the trail yet again.
What can you tell us about Debbie's boyfriend, Donald Davis?
Donald?
Yes.
I don't know him, but she was having trouble with a guy named Jimmy.
Jimmy?
Beth Landers was an employer of Debbie Brown, and they also had somewhat of a friendship. Debbie had confided in her that Jimmy had been abusive.
Jimmy, he would call the office all the time. He was always after her and so threatening.
Investigators confirm from the medical examiner's report on Debbie that there was a Jimmy in her life. It was written on her skin.
She had a tattoo that's called Jimmy, that had Jimmy on her arm.
First, Donald Davis, and now Jimmy. Was Debbie being terrorized by two stalkers?
Detective Barona.
While detectives ponder this possibility, a call comes in from the Connecticut State Crime Lab where evidence from the scene is being processed.
We spoke to the identification unit, and lo and behold, there was a unfiled restraining order application in Debbie Brown's purse at the time that she was killed.
Apparently she had filled out the paperwork but not brought it back to the precinct.
That restraining order identifies a Donald Davis and a Mark Stewart as the potential target of this restraining order.
Suddenly, a tangled mess of possible identities throws law enforcement into confusion.
Not only do they have this Donald Davis and Jimmy to deal with, but now they have to wonder what they really know about Mark Stewart.
Are they the same person? Are they two different people?
Is Mark really who he says he is? Is Donald?
While police struggle to untie this knot, detectives are about to make an even more astonishing breakthrough. And this one would be enough to spin everyone's heads right around.
And they're running your data, your fingerprints, through a computer system. And then yet another name pops up.
In the long days following Debbie Brown and Desmond McFarland's murders, police in Bridgeport, Connecticut found themselves embroiled in an ever-growing complicated and mysterious case.
At this point, they have at least 3 names on their radar: Donald Davis, Jimmy, and Mark Stewart. Now they just had to find out who these individuals really are.
While detectives work to unravel this tangled mess, Bridgeport police make a huge breakthrough by way of observant bystanders on Ash Street.
A couple days after the murder, a young man and woman a couple of blocks away happened to find a gun in the bushes, and they turned it into the police.
The police tested the gun, and the ballistics matched the firearm that was used in the murder.
While ballistics confirm that the .40 caliber semi-automatic handgun is the murder weapon, they're missing the most desired piece of evidence.
It was dusted with fingerprints, but there were none to be found on this particular weapon. They could not tie this weapon to any particular person.
Without DNA residue, the gun will prove useless in identifying the perpetrator. But then, Cheryl Wilson, Debbie's friend and landlord, comes forward with a key piece of evidence.
She went into Debbie's room and got a photo of this person who she believed was terrorizing her and calling her constantly. And she gave that to law enforcement.
This is the guy that had been calling and harassing Debbie.
Detectives can see that the man they encountered on Castle Hill Avenue in the Bronx is the man depicted in the photograph.
This is Donald Davis.
I don't know if that's his real name, but that's definitely the man that had been bothering her.
So he has more than one name?
Yeah, I told you he's crazy.
As for Mark Stewart, detectives soon learn that he was nothing more than a pawn in Donald's twisted game.
Donald Davis had actually been using Mark Stewart's name.
Mr. Stewart, he was very, very scared. He was very concerned for his safety. Donald Davis, he was a bad guy. He would threaten people. He would extort people.
He had a reputation as someone who had been involved in other shootings or murders in Jamaica.
There's even stories of him from back in the days in Jamaica when he assassinated a man at a phone booth in the Waterhouse housing projects in Jamaica. So his reputation throughout the Jamaican community instills fear in anybody that may be involved with him or targeted by him.
In light of the new evidence, detectives feel increasingly confident Donald Davis is their triggerman. But without fingerprints on the gun or a positive eyewitness report, detectives can't bring in their primary suspect.
We need to work very quickly. Maybe he's gonna hurt someone else. There's a lot of different scenarios that can happen when you're dealing with a dangerous individual like this man.
While authorities may not be able to pin these murders on Donald Davis just yet, they believe there may be a way to collar him.
They do believe that based on the information that Lavella gives them regarding the breaking and entering into the home of one of Debbie Brown's clients, at least they have a burglary.
Detectives bring Lavella Cooper down to the station to review the newly acquired photo of Donald Davis.
Man, we have a picture pertaining to one of the break-ins at one of your clients' homes.
Ma'am, is this the guy?
Yes, that's him.
Are you sure?
Yes, that's the man that ran out the house.
Lavella recognized the individual in this photograph as the same individual who entered that Greenwich home on that day, sometime in October.
The breaking and entering into a dwelling that not belonging to him is all you need for the charge of burglary.
They obtain a warrant for his arrest for burglary of that residence, for the unlawful entry of that residence.
On January 16, 2009, a team of heavily armed officers descends on Donald's Bronx apartment building.
We had the full force of the U.S. Marshals. We had all their resources. We had everything we need. We had the Greenwich police with us. We had a lot of guys, and 20 guys went up the stairs because we weren't sure what to expect. This was a dangerous, violent felon. We were gonna go take him into custody. We didn't know if he was gonna employ force to resist arrest.
Mr. Davis, police, open up.
Put your hands behind your back.
He knew he was surrounded, and he let us in.
He was taken without incident and ultimately returned to Greenwich.
When police take Donald into custody for processing, the surprises keep coming.
Donald Davis is in the Greenwich Police Department. He's under arrest for burglary. And when you're under arrest, law enforcement is taking your fingerprints, they're taking photographs, and they're running your data through a computer system.
As detectives suspect, the database reveals that this was not Donald Davis's first brush with the law.
You've been arrested before, I believe in Texas or Arizona, for narcotics violations, and there was a weapon involved.
Hey, I've got a match on those fingerprints, but they're not Donald Davis.
Then who?
So we've got Donald Davis, also known as Jimmy, also known as Mark Stewart, but known in the system as Sheldon Reynolds.
He was in the system already under that name, perhaps. And I know there was a social security number that was associated with that name as well.
It's a shattering development. The man who terrorized and possibly murdered Debbie Brown was the very man whom she'd once lived with and loved. But inside an interrogation room, Sheldon Reynolds, AKA Donald Davis, remains steadfast of his innocence.
He made an oral statement saying, I wasn't anywhere near there, I don't know anything about this. Then when he gave a written statement, a more detailed statement, is when he said that he spends the weekend with his daughter and he was returning his daughter to her mother's house, which was in New York, again, not in the Bridgeport area at the time of the murder.
While Sheldon remains in custody on the burglary charge, investigators work diligently to pinpoint his exact location on the night of the murders.
They were looking at possibly doing cell tower dumps to determine whether Sheldon's cell phone was hitting off in the area at the time of the homicide, as well as following other leads.
Law enforcement then initiates a search warrant of his cell phone records for the purpose of hour pings, data, and cell phone records.
What it was just historical information, not real-time tracking, but historical information showing where his cell phone was at certain times on the day of the murder. And they can do that by seeing what cell tower, I say pinging, what cell tower it was communicating with.
They pinged where he was that night in Bridgeport at 6:33 p.m., which is only 45 minutes before the murders.
The defendant putting himself in New York that night at the time of the murder was very valuable because evidence that was later developed from his cell phone showed that his cell phone was in the Bridgeport area both before and after the murder. So that was a way to show that his alibi was untruthful.
Detectives subsequently solidify their case through interviews with Sheldon's own family.
He had a sister that lived in the area by Debbie Brown's relatives or friends. She told me that on the night that Debbie Brown and Mr. McFarland were killed, that her uncle was actually outside her porch that night in Bridgeport, Connecticut, not in New York as he said he was, just after the crime.
She heard him outside her door that night, calling her by a name that only very close family members or associates from Jamaica would use when she didn't open the door, but she recognized the voice.
With hard evidence bolstering their case, authorities formally charged Sheldon Reynolds with 2 counts of murder.
I just felt happy when they caught him.
My mother first got the news, and she came to me smiling, happy. She said they caught the man that murdered Debbie.
But when the trial finally gets underway, will this cunning suspect manage to slip through the arms of justice one last time?
When I heard that he's denying that he did it, that was crazy. It was just crazy how manipulative he was still trying to be.
After a whirlwind investigation into the deaths of Debbie Brown and Desmond McFarland, Bridgeport police believe they have their man. But who their man really is remains inconclusive.
Although he was prosecuted under the name Sheldon Reynolds, nobody knew him by that name.
To this day, I don't know if his name was Donald Davis or Sheldon Reynolds. He used aliases everywhere he went.
He would change his appearance to adapt a different persona, and it was crazy because I realized that, okay, this really is a madman.
The man authorities now call Sheldon Reynolds spends 2 years in a Bridgeport jail as state's attorneys compile their case against him.
In March of 2011, at the Fairfield County Superior Court, trial began for Sheldon Reynolds.
In their opening statements, prosecutors described for the jury a man driven to murder by jealousy.
He couldn't let it go that she broke off a relationship with him.
He began a campaign of stalking her, calling her, threatening her friends, threatening her family, going to her employers, trespassing on private property in order to see her, begging her to come back, and she refused.
Then, Desmond McFarland came into the picture. When Sheldon saw that Debbie's daughter Regine was becoming close to Desmond, Sheldon was pushed over the edge.
He explained on one of his ranting calls who was at bringing Debbie's daughter food.
In Sheldon's mind, Desmond's paternal attitude towards Regine meant that Debbie was surely slipping from his grasp.
As far as we know, they were friends and that was it. We produced evidence at trial that indicates the defendant, however, thought they were having some sort of an affair. And that was his motivation, or at least part of his motivation, for the murders.
Prosecutors say that this irrational, misguided belief culminated in a senseless tragedy on the night of December 7th, 2008.
He staked out the house. And when she arrived, the person did not hesitate to go to the car. He didn't wait for her to even get out of the car. He went straight to the car. As the door is opening and she's taking out the groceries, he then lets out fire into the window that kills Mr. McFarland. Comes around, shoots Debbie.
Desmond seems to be a victim of circumstance, a man in the wrong place at the wrong time, with the wrong person, with a homicidal ex-boyfriend looking to get even with Debbie Brown.
But the defense counters that speculations about jealousy cannot make a case for murder when there's insufficient direct evidence.
From a defense perspective, there's no smoking gun. No one actually sees Sheldon Reynolds kill anyone. No one can actually and definitively place Sheldon Reynolds on Ash Street on December 7th, year 2008. You've got a bunch of phone calls, but you can't put them at the scene, not definitively.
The defense was really just hoping that we would not be able to prove identity, the identity of the killer. So they were really just challenging our evidence on identity in any way they could. A lot of jurors expect DNA evidence. They expect some kind of conclusive scientific proof, and we didn't have that here.
As for what circumstantial evidence does exist, defense attorneys do their best to quash it.
The defense did everything they could to suppress evidence. They did not want the state to put up some of those witnesses in reference to outside statements and previous acts.
Arguing that Sheldon's past behavior towards Debbie should carry no weight in determining his guilt, the defense argues that her 911 call should be inadmissible.
It was defense's position that the 911 calls of Debbie Brown were inadmissible hearsay. What does that mean? An out-of-court statement that is not subject to cross-examination. It's an out-of-court statement that should be deemed unreliable.
But the state refutes this notion, indicating that 911 calls are a reliable source in establishing Sheldon's intent to harm Debbie.
I'm calling to make a complaint.
Okay. All right, what's the problem, ma'am?
Yes, it's my ex who's been stalking me since yesterday.
Your what?
My ex, Donald Davis.
He's been stalking you?
The judge heard the arguments of the defense and decided, you know what? Sounds good, but I believe that these 911 calls are indeed admissible. These 911 calls, she didn't make them up. She wasn't thinking about some future event. She was thinking about something that was presently happening to her.
The centerpiece of the prosecution's strategy bolsters the challenged evidence of the 911 calls.
The most damning evidence in this case against Sheldon Reynolds were the people in Debbie Brown's life. They all came out. They all spoke out. They all said, this man is dangerous. This man has been stalking her.
Several witnesses, they were fearful of the defendant.
In addition to the 911 calls, prosecutors have one more piece of circumstantial evidence in their possession, and it might just be the most damning of them all.
A block and a half from Debbie Street, there was a factory, and that factory had a security camera that was recording on the night of the murder.
What you see on that video is the car. It's very grainy. You see the dome light come on, you see the figure cross the street to the side of the car, and then back again, and when the car pulls away, it doesn't have its headlights on.
The individual in it stayed in, lying, if you will, in wait.
Prosecutors say the individual can be only one man, Sheldon Reynolds.
After hearing the state's case, on April 8, 2011, the jury retires to deliberate Sheldon's fate. After several hours of deliberation, they return with their verdict.
All of those pieces were able to convince the jury that Sheldon Reynolds, with his campaign of terror, took a .40 caliber semi-automatic weapon and pumped more than 6 shots into Desmond McFarland and over 5 shots into his ex-girlfriend, the woman that he had stalked.
At the sentencing hearing nearly 2 months later, the judge gives Sheldon Reynolds the maximum penalty Connecticut law will allow.
Judge Kavanewski sentenced him to 125 years, 60 consecutive on each count of murder, and then 5 years on the pistol without a permit.
When I heard the verdict was guilty and at sentencing phase that this man had received 125 years sentence, I really felt that justice had been done.
When I heard that Madman got 125 years, I was really happy at that point. That was a huge day for my family.
But to this day, the burden of one man's actions still weighs heavily on Debbie and Desmond's friends and family, especially since their tragic demise was the senseless product of deadly obsession.
She didn't deserve to die like this. She didn't deserve to die so fast. She didn't deserve for him to just abruptly take her life and feel like it was okay.
I feel that grief I got always be there. I don't think that them catching him, I got help relieve that grief.
As for Regine, she's now a mother herself in Jamaica, but she'll never forget the woman that raised her.
I love my daughter so much. I just try to make her feel loved the way my mom would make me feel loved. My mom would just constantly tell me that she loves me. I do the same with my daughter.